Thank you, Megan, and thank you everybody for joining. Welcome. Today I'm going to, as Megan mentioned, I'm going to try have a presentation, and I've done the majority of it. Some of it is new pieces for me, so you're kind of the first group that will get some of this information in the second half. That's new for me. In the presentation, I'm going to try to be a little interactive. So I'll have basically every section will kind of end with or have little questions that you can respond to in the chat. And it's just kind of number one for me to kind of get a gauge on how you're kind of following along with the presentation, but also just to kind of kickstart your brain a little bit on some of these things since we're talking about ethics in technology as it pertains to social work or um, clinical work or whatever it may be. And so, I want to make sure that people are not just listening to me, blab on for a couple hours, but are actually kind of working through some of this in their mind because there were, a decent amount of ones and twos in here. So it's stuff that, and we're not only going to talk about AI, we're also going to talk about social media and telehealth as well. That'll be the second half. I do hope to and plan to take a break near the midway point. So we'll take probably like a 15-minute break. Um, and then we'll come back and finish up. So I think I covered most of the stuff there. So I'll go ahead and get started. So this first, I guess, a little introduction about sorry, excuse me. It still is a little early for me out here. I'm in California out here, if that wasn't already mentioned. It might have been. So usually I was telling Megan that I'm not typically a morning person, but I woke up really peppy this morning, and so I'm energetic about this presentation and excited to get going on it. So for me, at this time of morning, it's surprising that I'm peppy, but here I go. So I have spent at this point now about 20. My name is Ernesto Bejarano. I have been in the social work field in some capacity for this. I believe it's September. It was my 28th year in the field. So I've been around a little bit, and these gray hairs might tell that story. Um, And if you don't mind, since we want to be a little interactive, you can put in the chat how long you've been doing this kind of work, if you want to share that, just so we can also see what kind of experience we have in the room. But I've been doing social work for 28 years. Primarily, the majority of that time has been in child welfare. So I've done probably a good two-thirds of that time in child welfare. But when you've been around for a long time, you do sometimes get a chance to move around the profession and do different things. So I also spent a decent chunk of time in doing school social work, drug and alcohol prevention. An interesting time I spent doing monitoring and evaluation of programs. And then well, I say the light at the end of the tunnel because I'm getting towards the end of my kind of professional official career. And this AI stuff that I've been working on is kind of like what I'm maybe transitioning to post retirement in a few years. But I can see that retirement light at the end of the tunnel at this point. And so we're going to start off with AI and the ethics of AI. And so I just wanted to, I mean, some of you who are in the chat said that you were a 3 on the scale. So you maybe are familiar with the crazily fastly rapidly changing stuff that AI can do in terms of like video and voice, and it's rapidly increasing. But one of the things at this point is kind of old now is the ability to generate images. So this image of me that you see on the screen, that's an AI generated image. That I never took that picture. That's not an actual picture of me. I just gave an AI a couple of pictures of me, different pictures, and then it generated. I don't own that suit. I mean, that's not me. It's AI generated. But the things that AI can do at this point are amazing, and it's rapidly increasing. So before we get into that, I just wanted to go over the things that we hope to cover today, or we will cover. So there's a thing that worked on over the past year that I've been kind of presenting, and it's part of this presentation, which is the 6 pillars of practical and responsible AI use for social workers, but it applies to counselors and therapists for the most part. And so we're going to learn about those 6 pillars, and also kind of really focusing in on the ethics that are involved with those pillars. We'll learn about the ethical challenges of telehealth in the provision of services. So I myself, so this is one of the new parts. I myself don't provide telehealth. It's not part of the work that I do right now. So maybe Megan or others may jump in and help inform the presentation at that point. But we're going to talk about the ethics that you need to consider when you're providing telehealth. And then finally, the last part will be the ethical responsibilities of social media, using social media. So that part of technology has kind of been, it's probably of the three, it's the oldest that most of us or many of us may be most familiar with, just because social media has at least a decade has been kind of present in the work potentially. So those are the three core areas that we're going to cover during this presentation. So, as I mentioned, the first part we will get started with is ethical and responsible AI. So, just as a little background, I'll start off. So, in I'm bad with time, but like a year and a half ago, this thing called Chat GPT came on my radar. I think I was scrolling TikTok or something, and I saw a video about Chat GPT. So I just randomly started looking into it, and I was immediately amazed by, like, first of all, just that it could give any kind of basic answer. But then as I started asking it questions related to social work, like increasingly nuanced, challenging questions to try to stump it, it was not getting stumped. It was like, in some cases, in some cases, I hate to admit, probably giving better answers even than what I would have given. So at that point, I was amazed. And on December 13th of 2020, oh, there's the 2022, I, for some reason, I felt compelled to post on Facebook, ChatGPT is a literal global game changer. I was just so amazed by what it could do. And because of that, I kind of just started going down a rabbit hole of how could we use Chat GPT in social work. And so I started just kind of, I've had a little bit of experience working with some little technical stuff, tech stuff. I'm in California, I'm in Silicon Valley, so that's like around me, but I'm by no means an engineer or a programmer or anything. I'm a social worker through and through, but I had enough, information and know how to get started. So I developed a tool called the Social Work Magic AI tool, based on ChatGPT and OpenAI, which is the platform that ChatGPT is built upon. So I developed over the course of the next few months that tool, Social Work Magic. And then as I started kind of rolling that tool out and sharing it with people, I really started realizing that either social workers didn't know anything about AI, or what they knew was not necessarily accurate, or they were just outright anti AI. And so I felt that there was a gap in knowledge. So I put together a book called Artificial Intelligence for Social Workers. And it's a pretty easy read book, but it just covers like the basics of AI, some of which you'll get today. The basics of AI, how it can be applied in social work, ethics, all the kind of stuff that you'll get today. It's an expanded version of that. So over the course of the past now almost year and a half, I've been focusing a lot of my time on these kind of things that I've been working on, and trying to build it out and still do my regular 9 to 5 job. Um, but I want to start here with, I mentioned that at the beginning there was a lot of people who were um, anti AI, or at least had questions about it or doubts, which is perfectly healthy. I think we need that. Um, but I highlight this post that I got from one of my social media platforms because it has a couple different areas that I think are significant in terms of just how what the feeling is in the profession about AI. And so I'll just read it out. I'm not a proponent of using these tools. I think that human connection is so important, and being genuine in our attempts to connect is meaningful. So I don't think there's anyone on this training, hopefully, that disagrees with that part. I think myself as a proponent, Megan as a proponent, many of you who are maybe are threes on your scale, we all do hopefully believe that human connection, the human element of our work is essential, and we have to keep that in mind over all else when we're working with AI. Then this person states, I hope and pray that in our states of burnout, we do not use AI tools to ease our jobs rather than advocate for additional resources. So basically, what they're saying is that, they are hoping that people don't get so comfortable with AI that they just give up on advocating for getting the resources that we need so desperately in many parts of the profession, and just start leaning heavily on AI. And I agree again with that to an extent, but I also, having been around for almost 30 years, like, we've been advocating for my 30 years, and I know prior to that, for caseloads and compensation and, work-life balance and all these kinds of things. And we've had successes along the way. It's not that we haven't been successful, but it's still an issue with us. And so we can continue to just, one option is to put AI to the side and focus all our efforts on advocacy to try to, make sure that we are treated as we should be in the profession. And that's one way we can go. But like I said, we've been doing that for at least 30 years and made minimal progress. In my opinion, if we have a tool like AI that can help us to kind of reduce burnout or eliminate burnout, or at least help address burnout, then it's wise for us to use, to leverage that technology to help us, because once we're helped and these tools are able to streamline our work and maybe improve our efficiency, the end user, which is our clients, our families, our communities, will be the ones ideally who will benefit. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. And then the person finishes by saying, my heart says that AI is unethical in our field. Well, that is what we will be talking about, the ethics of AI in our field. So this was, probably like 9 months ago that I got this, but just as recently as a couple of weeks ago, I had similar feedback from someone on a post that was just like very anti AI still. So we're going to get to those kind of trends in the profession and how people are or are not using AI. But before we get there, for the ones in the chat, I'm not going to go in a deep dive on exactly what AI is, but I'll just give you a super high level summary, I guess, of what AI actually is. So AI is a computer or a system or a machine that is trained to solve problems on its own, basically. And so in the old days, and when I say old days, like, maybe a couple years ago, the majority of the way that computers, software, and systems worked was that engineers or coders or programmers, they would produce millions of lines of code that basically told the computer or the system, if this then that. So if the user types RUN, then run the program. If the program opens, show this on the screen. Like, every single thing the computer was told to do, and then it could replicate that over time and execute those commands. And so that's the way computers worked, and systems worked previous to AI. But with AI, the way that it works is it's given a large set of data, basically the entire internet, or the corpus of the internet, I believe they call it. It's given all of the information from the internet, up to a certain date, depending on which model you're using. And it uses that information to kind of analyzes it, it identifies patterns, and it uses that training and information to, on its own, be able to respond to a user's question or prompt, as we call it. So now the engineers and the programmers, they didn't need to code every single line. They just need to feed the system the data, the information, the huge data set, and the AI systems are able to quote unquote think through that to provide responses based on patterns that it has identified in that training data set. So that's kind of the way that AI works. It's much more complex than that, but that's hopefully gives you an idea of what we're dealing with here. And AI, in spite of what people may think about it, there's at this point, it's kind of hard to dispute the fact that there are at least, I mean, many use cases where the technology is able to save time and say kind of streamline work, and it helps social workers and other practitioners to kind of get a hold of their workflow because it provides you with it can provide you with kind of like what Google search might do, but on steroids, if you will. So it's when you do a Google search, you search for something in Google, and then Google gives you pages and pages of relevant, potentially relevant information. Then you click on each thing, and you have to find within each click the information that you're looking for. With AI, you type in a question, and it kind of eliminates the middleman. So it doesn't give you every single page. Well, now it does give you the reference to where it got the information from, but it also just produces the response that you need. So that's just one way where a social worker or any practitioner, instead of searching for something on Google and then spending time kind of, um, you know, sifting through the information to get the response they need, they can just put the question into AI and get a response. Now, we're going to talk about how to use that response, but I'm just trying to provide an example of how um, AI technology can help social workers to streamline their work. And the significance of that is that it allows social workers to spend more time doing what we're in social work to do typically, which is that one-on-one human centered work with individuals or families or whoever it is you're working with. So that's really, in my mind, kind of the end goal of AI is like, let's see if we can make our work more efficient in terms of like the kind of busy work almost that we need to do, and so to some extent, and allow us to have more time either to focus on those that we're working with or to focus on ourselves, to actually have like a couple minutes to take a break and enjoy a cup of coffee, or talk to a colleague or something like that. And real self-care in a real way can occur if we're able to leverage these tools effectively. So, as I mentioned, there is currently still, this is, even though it's been a little more than a year where this stuff has really been out there, there's still an ongoing conversation about the appropriateness of using AI. There are still many people in our profession who are doubtful or skeptical about using AI, whether it's because of ethical considerations or they're worried about losing their job or those kinds of things. There's an ongoing discussion still about this topic in the field, which I think is super healthy. If we just all said, yes, let's use it, or no, let's not use it, that really, I don't think would be helpful. It's not, as social workers, I think we are the kind of people who want to kind of work through things and have discussions and see the pros and cons, the benefits and challenges, and then determine what our usage might be. So that conversation is still happening. But the conversation, in my estimation, is kind of shifting from when I started this a year and something ago, where I got kind of a lot of resistance and pushback. Now, there are people that I've seen that are more open as they've tried these tools. They're more open to at least the possibility of using AI in their work. Um, and really thinking about how it can ethically, legally, and practically be applied in whatever it is that they're doing. So a lot of practitioners are exploring different kinds of tools, whether it's Chat GPT or Social Work Magic, or there's Claude is another tool. There's Gemini. There's all these different tools now, and it's built into so many tools that we use. It's built into Gmail. It's built into Google search. Like, it's everywhere. So people are kind of coming on board, coming online, and trying it for themselves. So some of the concerns that I mentioned that people have had are the ethics of AI. Is this really ethical for us as as a human center profession? Is it ethical for us to use this very technical kind of technology in our work? Does it somehow is it somehow contradictory to our code of ethics? So that's a question that's out there. People are concerned about potential bias that may be introduced into the algorithms by the developer. So basically, out here in Silicon Valley or wherever they're developing these tools, do those developers have the proper lens to build tools in such a way that they're not biased in any particular direction? That's a concern that we have as a profession. The training models that are used, I mentioned that AI uses these large data sets to train the models to give them the information that they need. And some people have concerns about just what is that information? Is it just everything, or is it certain pieces of data? And the people, or, if I write a book and AI is getting its training from its data from everything on the internet, if my book is on the internet, it may be trained with my information. So people are concerned with, did I give permission to have my data be used by these models? That's a question that we have, that many people have. Data storage and confidentiality, that people are concerned, if I'm using these tools, how do I know that whatever I input into them is safe, is secure, is confidential? It depends on the tool you're using and how you're using it, but that is a question that people have. And then, as I mentioned, people are concerned like, hey, if AI can do all these things, what's to say that in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, it's going to do all of the things that I do and I'll be gone as a social worker? They won't need me anymore. So that is a concern, and we'll touch on that throughout the presentation. But these are just some of the concerns that social workers and other practitioners have identified in my work as kind of like the concerns they have or doubts with using AI. So at the end of the day, your decision to integrate AI into your practice or to not integrate it is going to be based on a few general factors. Number one, your personal beliefs and ethics. So each one of us has our own perspective on what this work should be, could be, and we will use that. That's based on our, maybe cultural beliefs or the NASW code of ethics or whatever code of ethics you're working with. Like, we'll take all that into consideration and see if that aligns well enough for us with the AI. So that's one factor. Our comfort with just technology in general and AI specifically. So I know in my office there are many, many people who still, I think, inappropriately use reply all on emails. I don't know how many of you get those reply all messages when it should just be a reply. But, some people are more comfortable with technology in general than others. And then when it comes to AI, this newest frontier, some people are not really comfortable. They don't know how to interact with these tools, how to ask questions, how to kind of take it for, to validate the information. So people have a wide range of comfortability with technology and with AI. Um, and then the specific use case that you may be looking at also will help determine your comfort with AI. So some people, maybe they're just using AI just for information gathering and they're comfortable with that. Just kind of almost like I mentioned, like a version of Google, a new version of Google or a search engine. And so with that, maybe they're comfortable because it's pretty, there's nothing confidential or there's nothing to worry about pretty much. And they're comfortable with that. Maybe that's their use case. But other people, maybe they're looking at using it more closely with actual face-to-face client work and some application in that area. And so they will need to consider their use case and think about, I'm not really comfortable with AI in my work with this family. Or maybe, hey, this AI is going to help me be even more helpful to this family and it does apply to my use case. So that's one thing that people will consider. Your organizational policies and procedures. You might be gung ho, super excited about AI, but if you work for an agency or an organization, they might be like, you know what, we're still faxing information. We're not ready for AI yet, so you can't use it. And so you need to make sure that your policies and procedures align with your eagerness potentially to use these tools, and that will impact your decision to integrate AI or not. And then your place in your career. You know, if you're a seasoned person like me and almost out the door, you might just say, I don't want to learn another new thing. I'm gonna go with what I know and ride off into the sunset. But if you're maybe early in your career or mid career, you might realize that, hey, this is a reality at this point, and I need to kind of start learning it. So all of these things and probably others that you can think of are going to be a part of your decision making to determine whether or not you want to use AI in your work. And that's very personal, very individual, and reg- either way you go with it is fine, because we all have that, you know, ability to decide what's right for us and those who we serve. So, we will get into now. Oh, let me take a look really quickly at some of the comments and see if I can respond while I get a drink here.
Ernesto, someone had a question about how do we access this? Is it free? Does it cost money? I might be interested in playing around with it. So how do I access it?
So I didn't see the question specifically, but thank you for that, Megan. So you can access AI in a number of different ways. I mean, like I said, it's integrated into a lot of what we're using already. Google Map. I reference Google a lot because I use a lot of Google stuff, but map technologies, search technologies. Some of you may notice when you search for something nowadays, sometimes whether it's with Google or Bing or whatever you're using, you'll get the old kind of response that you used to get, all these different links, but you'll also get like a paragraph almost that has an answer there. That's AI. So you can click on that and use that AI, whether it's with Google or Microsoft or whoever. And those are free, like it's integrated into the search or the tools that you're using. Those are free. You can also go to like ChatGPT, Claude, Anthropic, Perplexity. There's all these different. I mean, if you just search for like AI models or something like that, you'll see all the different models that you can use. And most of these all have a free component, and then there are paid aspects of them that you can use for additional kind of more advanced functionality. The social work magic tool, which is just, I'll get into it more after, but it's basically a AI powered tool that has in the background training kind of social work specific training or knowledge built into it. So when you ask it questions, it's going to answer always with a social work lens, and it's more complex than that, but to boil it down, that's how that one works. And so that one is at socialworkmagic.com, and you can go on there and check that out. So there's a lot of different ways, free or paid, that you could use these technologies and start playing with them. But I'm encouraged and enthusiastic just to hear that people are open to playing with it and testing it out and seeing if it's right for them. I mean, if you do that process and you figure out that you love it or you hate it, hey, I respect the fact that you were open minded enough to try it and not just staunchly against it. Like any tool that we use, right? Whether it was email back in the day or Microsoft Office or, you know, text messaging, like each thing that comes up, we need to kind of try them out and see if they're appropriate for our work. So let's get into the 6 pillars of practical and responsible AI use in social work. So this is the part where I'm going to give some information and then give like an ethical scenario and then have some questions that you can respond to in the chat. So pillar number 1, that's really, these aren't necessarily in any order, but kind of. So pillar number 1, AI is a tool, it's not the answer. So AI tools, whichever one you decide to use, um, a lot of people think, or at least initially thought, that you ask an AI a question, the AI tool gives you the answer, and then that answer you just use it wherever you're trying to use it. You just ask, answer, use, and it was kind of as simple as that. But really, that's not the way, in our profession at least, that AI should be used. this, I guess, my opinion, but there's a lot of agreement on this. AI should be used, in fact, as a complement or a supplement to your work, but it's not a replacement for you as a social worker. So we mentioned, and we all know that a social work, clinical work, school counselors, all these kind of things that we do are human centered. Like without a doubt, that's what makes us the kind of people that we are, and it makes the work that we do what it is. It's human centered. There's a focus on human connection, on building relationships, building rapport, working, with individuals and systems to get things done and hopefully improve the lives of people. AI at this point is not going to replace that. And I'm going to be saying at this point a lot as I present because things change rapidly. So I'm speaking about how things are today, but 6 months, 12 months, 24 months could look different with AI. But as we speak, it's not a replacement for the human centered work that we do. And so when you use an AI tool, when you ask a question and you get a response, you still, at that point, that's just like sometimes kind of like a starter or foundational information. And depending on what you're doing, you can use a certain amount of that information, but you still have the responsibility as a professional to then get that response that you got from the AI and layer over that your own professional education, training, experience, expertise. You need to use your who you are as a social worker and use that to inform what you got from the AI. So the AI response, whatever tool you're using, typically should not be used like a standalone piece of information that you can then transfer over to whatever you're doing. You still, as a professional, need to look at what you got and use that the who you are as a social worker or a counselor or whatever. Use that professional experience to fill in the gaps that may be left from the AI tool that you're using. So that is pillar number one, is that AI is a tool that you can use just like any other tool that we use, but it's not the be all end all. You can't just in most cases, you can't just take what AI says and use that. And we'll get a little more into that in a second. But before we get there, here's a hypothetical ethical dilemma that applies to pillar number one. So, a child welfare agency introduces a new AI system that analyzes case histories and risk factors and instructs social workers on how to proceed with a family's case, including child removals. So, AI systems can be built to kind of take specific information about a case of someone that you're working with and make recommendations based on patterns that it sees about histories and behaviors and diagnoses and all the information you give it, it can then make predictions or recommendations if you train it to work in that way. Now, here are some ethical questions about a system like that. And this is where you can kind of put some responses into the chat. So, is it ethical for social workers to rely on AI generated recommendations because they have limited time for face to face interaction? So, many of us know that time is of the essence in social work, and our time is very limited often. So, if we have an AI tool that can streamline the work and help us to cut down on some of the time that we spend on this work, um, is that ethical? We're going to provide more timely information, more timely support to those that we work with, but is it ethical to rely on AI tools to do that? So that is, I mean, like I said, you can respond in chat or also just think it through hypothetically. The second ethical question for your consideration is how can the social workers ensure that their professional expertise is not overshadowed by AI generated decision making? So if you say that no, we shouldn't rely on AI generated recommendations, I agree with that. We shouldn't rely on them. But if you're open to maybe using them as a tool, how can we use them as a tool while still ensuring that our professional expertise is kind of the primary um, source of information or decision making that we're using and not the AI tool. How can that be implemented? So let me take a look over here. Um, you should take recommendations into consideration, but should not make the final decision. Relying on your gut feeling and interactions face to face is a big factor in decision making. Caitlin Luby, thank you for that. And I think that essentially captures kind of what we're talking about, is that you can take the recommendations that you get from AI into consideration, but there is like a gut feeling that many of us get. It's hard to describe unless you've done this work, but there is intuition, a gut feeling. Some people might even call it like the art of this work that we really do pay attention to as social workers, that through our training and experience and education, we develop that, and people outside may not understand it, but that's a huge part of our decision making. And that's one of the things that AI in the near future, at least, is not going to take away. It can't produce those intangible kind of things that we do as social workers. And so it's not something that we can take out of the equation. So here's the next pillar. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your information. I don't have time to read all of them, but hopefully I'll see them later. Pillar number 2, confidentiality is critical. So as we're using AI, we can't just throw our professional obligations out the window. It doesn't change anything about our legal or ethical obligations as professionals. And clearly, confidentiality being one of those primary obligations. So when you decide to use an AI tool, confidentiality, privacy, those kinds of things should still, just as they would be in any other part of your work, they should still be at the forefront of what you're doing. And so the AI tools that you decide to play with or decide to use, you should typically look into them and see if they have security features built into them that kind of help with privacy and confidentiality, and or protocols or systems that are built into the way that they function, such that you can feel confident that that there's an effort being made to protect confidential information. That being said, at the end of the day, whether you're using Social Work Magic or Google Gemini or Perplexity, whatever tool you're using, the responsibility for protecting privacy and confidentiality still lies on you, just as it would if you're in a crowded office sending a fax in an open machine that's open to everybody, just as it would if you're using, you know, Instagram or something to message a youth that you can't get a hold of. Like whatever ethical and legal professional considerations that you would take on any work that you do with regards to confidentiality, it's the exact same thing with AI. So AI does not change, does not alter, does not take away any of our professional obligations in terms of confidentiality. And so here is an ethical dilemma regarding social confidentiality. A child welfare organization begins using an AI tool that processes sensitive personal information to analyze large volumes of case data to identify trends and suggest intervention strategies. The tool processes this information much faster than a human could. So it's this in this scenario, there's names, birth dates, diagnoses, all this personal information that is being used by an AI tool. And there, just in case you didn't know, there are tools that claim to be, and I don't have any reason to doubt at this point, to be HIPAA compliant. So they are tools. There's different levels of AI tools. Some are HIPAA compliant, and so they are maybe safer to put personal information into, and some are not HIPAA compliant. They're not built for that functionality. Um, and so in this case, we're assuming this would be a HIPAA compliant tool, and it processes information much faster than a human could. So it's taking in a lot of personal information, but it's also speeding up the process for this particular social worker who's using this. So here's the questions that go along with that. Again, for you to share in the chat if you have thoughts on this or just think it through. How can social workers balance their professional obligation to protect client confidentiality with the efficiency and advantages offered by AI? So if social workers, either as individuals or maybe your agency or organization, is using this AI system, how can you balance your obligation to protect confidentiality with the potential benefits of this tool? How can you ensure that you're working in a way that protects privacy? And then what safeguards should be required to ensure that AI tools adhere to the same standards of confidentiality that social workers uphold? So, what can you as an individual do to make sure that these confidentiality standards are not different than they would be in any other scenario? um, or that make sure that you hold your, what can you do to hold your agency or your organization accountable to also make sure that any AI system that they choose to integrate is actually protecting confidentiality of the work. Again, some of these tools are built with the purpose of utilizing private information, and so they are HIPAA compliant, but that's not all of them. So those are just questions for you to consider and, um, work through. Let me see. Hire experts who understand software. Oh, so this one here, hire experts who understand software fields to rule in and out pieces of information that are confidential. So that, I think I'll get to it elsewhere in the presentation, but I will mention it here. One of the reasons to be open to AI and using AI and just learning about AI as social workers is that if we do not, um, get involved with this and have our voice heard, these tools are still going to be developed. They're going to be developed a few miles away from where I'm sitting right now, just by engineers and programmers and people in these tech buildings all around here, who may or may not have the lens that we have, the perspective about confidentiality and human-centered work. So as someone kind of mentioned here, we need to have our voices at the table, which means those of you who are in this training or other kind of opportunities that you get should learn about these things, because you might be that voice that is at some table in your organization or maybe in, at an actual tech company, who informs the development of tools in such a way that they're more reflective of the kind of work that we need to do. So that's a little side note, but it is, a good contribution that I see here by someone. Okay. Pillar number 3, always validate results. So we kind of alluded to this one earlier. So when you get a response, um, from an AI, you cannot take that response as, complete fact. As time has gone on, I have noticed that responses from I mean, are in the 90th, 99th percentile accurate, and rarely do they come up with something that's off the wall or completely inappropriate, but it can happen. There's plenty, if you search like AI inappropriate responses or something like that, there's plenty of instances out there where AI, maybe not necessarily in social work, but just in general, has responded in a way that sometimes they call it, um, I'm trying to blank on the term now, hallucinating. They, excuse me, they provide responses that are totally, like, just don't make sense, and that is a possibility. Or there's a possibility that the response that you get from an AI is not quite on point. It's not necessarily reflective of either your particular application in that moment or just a general response overall. So you do need to take the responses that you get from AI and validate what it gives you. Like I said, 90% of the time or more, it's going to be appropriate, accurate information. Oftentimes, it's going to be insightful, that in such a way that it'll provide to you things that you didn't even consider, but they are good points. And so that's going to be the case most of the time, but you still need to validate that the responses are appropriate. Um, and in this way, you're kind of ensuring that the human element again is infused, not even infused, is the overarching part of any given response. And you're not just taking the digital or AI response and using that as the be all end all. So Always validate your responses. That is a huge pillar of the work of using AI in your work. And so here is the ethical dilemma that relates to validation of results. Agency social workers struggle to keep up with their caseloads and the validation of the information provided by the agency's new system. So they have their caseload already. Now they're using a new system that they need to plug in the information, get a response, and then validate that. So it's a little bit of an extra step. Some fear that in their rush to meet deadlines, they may overlook inaccuracies in AI's ability to identify nuances such as cultural differences or specific family dynamics. So, some people in this scenario are kind of fearing that people will begin to trust more. As I mentioned, the responses are usually good. So in this scenario, people begin to say, "Hey, that I'm just going to plug it in and I'm going to take the response, and it's okay. Like it's never wrong. It's going to be good." So that's the fear people have. People begin to rely more and more on AI without validation because they develop some sense of trust for the responses that they're getting. But here are the questions, ethical questions surrounding that. In situations where AI recommendations seem accurate and time is of the essence, how should social workers ensure that a validation process providing contextual understanding of a family's dynamics is not bypassed? So, in this scenario or in kind of the work that we do, how can we ensure that over time, if we're open to using these things or if our agency is kind of mandating that we use them as part of our protocols, how can we make sure that we don't become too reliant upon them such that we're not validating responses to make sure that they are appropriate? And then the next one is, what processes or guidelines can be implemented to ensure that AI results undergo meaningful human validation and don't sacrifice the irreplaceable insight that human social workers bring to each case? So, not just your own personal validation of responses, but in terms of like a bigger picture organizationally, what kind of protocols or processes should we consider implementing such that it doesn't maybe allow for social workers to bypass this validation so that we don't really just become an AI dependent practitioner or organization? What do we need to build into our systems so that we maintain that human element as we work with these tools and integrate them into the work? And I apologize that I can't go through all the responses right now, but I really appreciate. I see people are really, providing some pretty robust responses. So I thank you for doing that. Hopefully, you're all reading them, and kind of maybe having a little side discussion in the chat. But I appreciate the thought that you're putting into these responses, and I will hopefully get access to read them later, because I appreciate that you're doing that work, and you're going to get more out of it too by doing that. So here's pillar number 4. Check use permissions. I mentioned, and we're talking a little bit about using AI tools within an organization or an agency that you work for, maybe. And from what I've seen so far, AI, like just acknowledgement of AI, is not really common at this point in a lot of agencies or organizations. They like, it's almost like mum's the word in some places. They don't want to even talk about it. If you ask about it, they kind of shy away from it. And so in most cases that I've seen, it's unlikely that an agency or an organization, especially bigger ones, have really even put into place any kind of protocols or guidelines. They might have a basic, super standardized set of guidelines, but it's I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe in the chat, but a lot of organizations don't really have anything in place in terms of AI use permissions. But if you are going to be using AI in your work as an individual, so your organization hasn't implemented an AI tool, but you just want to use Social Work Magic or Google or Gemini, something on your own, you need to make sure that you check with your organization to make sure that your use aligns with what they are comfortable with, whether it's legally or programmatically or whatever it may be. Um, if those guidelines exist, you want to be aligned with them. And if they don't exist, then you need to be really clear and really transparent and communicate with your organization about what you're doing, how you're doing it, everything that you're probably going to need to educate them on the work that you're doing with AI. Now, unfortunately, in my experience, you may get pushback on that. And instead of people being open to it at the higher levels of some organizations, they may just want to play it safe and say, no, no AI. And unfortunately, maybe that will be what you'll have to do in your organization until they catch up. But you don't want to be using it, and maybe you're getting a lot of benefits from it, but somebody, finds out, hey, such and such is using AI to do their work, and then you may run into problems and jeopardize your job or whatever it may be. You don't want that. So you do want to be transparent and communicative about your use of AI. And when those protocols do exist in an organization, they've been developed in such a way, ideally, that they're there to protect client safety, they're there to protect confidentiality, they're there to protect you as a social worker or a practitioner. So they've been developed over time, in some organizations in a way that makes sense for the work that they do. So if they do exist, you don't want to go against them, because organizationally it has been determined that those are kind of the best practices for you and the people that you serve. But you always want to check use permissions if you're going to use, as an individual, AI in your work. So here is the ethical dilemma for pillar number 4. Some social workers find their organizational AI policies restrictive, arguing that they prevent them from using the AI's full capabilities in time sensitive situations. Others feel that bypassing some agency AI protocols in urgent cases could lead to faster interventions. However, noncompliance with agencies' AI policies could cause legal risks and compromise client confidentiality. So that's kind of the dilemma that you may have in an organization with AI use. So here are the questions around that. Number 1, is it ethical for social workers to bypass AI guidelines when they feel that it's in the best interest of the client, even if it violates organizational policies? So if you're using AI and you feel like, hey, this is an urgent situation, I can get access to this information and move this along quickly to help my client do what they need to do. But it's not real, it's frowned upon by the organization. Like, how do you deal with that? You're there to serve this client, but you're also bound by a bureaucracy, maybe, or a system that has some stuff in place that may prevent that from happening. So where do you go with that? How can social workers balance the need for swift action in urgent cases with the requirement to adhere to AI usage policies that protect client safety and confidentiality? So that's kind of basically the same question. How do you find that balance in using tools that are maybe more efficient for you, they're helpful for you, and they help you to get through your work in a very streamlined way and are benefiting the client? How do you balance that with the policies and maybe rigid standards that an organization has? Is there a way to kind of work that out such that all parties kind of get what they need out of this new, super emerging new area? That's kind of things that we need to think about when it comes to these policies and procedures within organizations. Pillar number 5. We have a couple more pillars, and then we're doing pretty good on time. So we might get through pillar number 6 and have time for questions specifically around these things that we're covering, and then we'll take a break after that. So pillar number 5, informed consent. So if you are able to and decide to use AI in your work with clients, it should never be done in a way that they don't know about. if you're deciding to use AI, you need to have that discussion with the people that you're working with and talk about kind of what you're doing. Like, hey, I'm using this tool. This is an AI tool. Here's why I'm using it. Here's what the benefits are going to be to the use. Here's the challenges that we might find. How can we work together to use this? Or, do you have concerns about this? What are your thoughts about my using this tool? Like, you really need to have an open, transparent discussion with the people that you are working with about your use of the tool. And you need to make sure, like, how their data, you tell them how their data is going to be used, how you're going to protect their privacy, like everything they need to know about your AI use. They need to be not only informed of that, but they also need to agree and give consent to that. So this is an area where, well, not unfortunately, but we can see sometimes many benefits of, oh man, I'm going to be able to really help this person because I can plug in this information and the AI is going to help me find these resources and all this stuff. You could be super optimistic, but then you can have the person that you're working with be like, no, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't want you to use that. And let's just do it the way that it's always done. So that's the discussion that you need to have. And the discussion needs to include not just a discussion, but actual consent to use these tools. And the client or the individual that you're working with needs to also understand that these agreements are not like one and done. Like, at any point in time, they might agree to it up front, but maybe they didn't really understand it, and later they decide to change their mind and not consent to it. That's within their right. So they really need to understand that as well. That they can maybe consent now, but change their mind later, or maybe they don't consent now and go the other way. Maybe later on they decide that they are comfortable with it. They need to know though that they have that autonomy about their case to make that decision about whether or not they consent to your using AI in your work with them. So here is the ethical dilemma for this one. A social worker is caught between using an AI tool, which has improved their decision making accuracy and timeliness, and the growing discomfort from clients who feel they were not fully informed about the depth of AI's involvement in the work. While the worker did obtain initial consent, clients are now raising concerns and some are considering withdrawing their consent for AI involvement. So that's kind of the scenario that I described, that the social worker is seeing the benefits, but the clients are having doubts now about, they're just not comfortable with it. So some questions that may arise or we may want to think about: is it ethical to continue using AI in a client's case if they have concerns or want to withdraw consent, even if the social worker believes that the AI's involvement would benefit the client and their case? Hopefully that one is pretty clear. I mean, what are the ethics around using this technology with someone if they're not giving you consent to do so? Hopefully that's an easy answer for most people, but I guess we'll see in the chat. And then, what steps should be taken to ensure full understanding about the benefits of AI use, as well as the client's right to control how their information is handled and how decisions about their case are made? So, kind of like, how do you make a system out of this? If you're going to be integrating or hoping to integrate AI in your work with clients, what steps or systematic kind of approach do you put in place so that it is consistently this process that you're following to work with clients to make sure that informed consent is understood and is obtained in every case? How do you kind of build that into the work that you do? Now we get to pillar number 6, the last pillar of the 6 pillars of practical and responsible AI use: tailor results as needed. This kind of goes back to the number 1 and 3, I think. AI is not a tool, it's not the answer, it's a tool. And also the validation of responses. This one is related to those. So when you get a response back from an AI, although it is improving, from what I've seen, like every day it improves at some of this stuff, but it does lack the ability to detect kind of the specific intangibles or nuances in any given case. So it can give pretty standard, informed, professional, great answers, but there are some pieces to cases or work that you're doing that are more nuanced in than what the AI gives you. It's not necessarily going to get the especially in one-to-one work. We talked earlier about gut feeling and intuition. When you're working with people, there's a huge element of our work that comes from that. It comes from this kind of energy or vibe that you almost get when you're working with someone. And that's hard to translate into a question for an AI system and therefore a response from the system. So you need to, when you get a response from an AI, that gut feeling, that intuition, that energy, that vibe, those nuances, all the stuff that we do as professionals, that's what you're going to use to tailor your results to more accurately reflect this human centered approach. And so you can't just, again, take the results that as you get them, like I said, unless you're using it just to gather information or maybe do some research, that can be fine to just use it as is in some cases. But when we're talking about more specific human centered work, the results need to be tailored to your use case. Um, and the tailoring that you do in these instances should match the preferences that your client has, the person you're working with, their life circumstances, their cultural reality, all those kinds of things. Your tailored results should reflect that, because quite often you're not going to get that in the response from an AI. Like I said, they are improving, and a lot of this stuff is dependent on how you prompt an AI or how you kind of formulate your question to the AI. In different presentations, I have a section on that, how to effectively prompt AIs. But if you give it a better prompt, a more um, sometimes detailed, specific prompt, you're going to get back maybe a closer tailored result to what you need, as opposed to just asking a very generalized question. But at the end of the day, you still will need to do some kind of tailoring to reflect your use case in that particular scenario. So here is with an ethical dilemma. A social worker recognizes that AI generated recommendations, while helpful and accurate in many respects, do not always align with the values or specific needs of the clients. Ignoring the AI suggestions completely could be a waste of a powerful tool, but following them without adjusting for case by case context could result in interventions that alienate the client or fail to address the core issues. So that's the thing, is like, these responses that I'm getting are super helpful, but I can't not use them without taking into consideration the reality, the real world version of this kind of situation. That's kind of the dilemma. So, questions to consider around that are: is it ethical to disregard AI generated recommendations if they do not align with the client's cultural values, even when the AI suggestions will be beneficial to the client overall? So, this is kind of a theme in some of these questions that you may be seeing, in that, wow, we can see the benefits of this. We can see how this is going to be helpful in moving this work forward and serving this individual or this family or this community. We see the benefits, but there are some challenges. How do we balance these benefits with the challenges? That's really, if I had to encapsulate all of this, that's the question: finding the balance with these tools if you're deciding to use them. What steps should be taken to ensure that AI suggestions are always interpreted through a critical lens, ensuring that they fit within the client's life circumstances and uphold their values and preferences? So, again, this is more like a kind of a systematic question, like, what can we do if we're using these tools to build in kind of into the system or the protocols or processes that we're using, that lens, that critical lens of the work that we do, so that, again, our professionalism, our professional abilities are the overriding impetus for the work that we're doing, and then we're not just leaning on the AI's responses to run with it and do use it in the work that we're doing. So yeah, so those are the questions around that one. And then let's see, do I have okay. So that is in this, yeah, that's the ethical considerations of using AI. It's kind of condensed and there's more that we could talk about. This is a growing area, so it's very dynamic, but we have um, actually, we have a decent chunk of time. So I love that by Megan. The AI is only as good as the user. That is 1,000% true. But are there questions that anybody has with regards to anything, or disagreements, or examples, or challenges, anything that people would like to put forth? And we have a little time to discuss here
So
as I
I
take.
I think Megan's message kind of is a good sounding board for a lot of the questions that we got. So when Megan said the AI is only as good as the user, some people in the beginning were questioning kind of how to, and I know you addressed what AI is and that there's a lot of different platforms that AI can be used. But how can someone that is very unfamiliar, so maybe some of the people that gave their knowledge a one at the beginning, how do you recommend that they get started and become a knowledgeable and quote unquote good user of the AI so that they can use that in their field and make sure that they're educated and ethical about it?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially with a lot of people that are super new to this. And I mean, the technology itself is super new. So if you're new to it, you're right on track. And I would say this actually came up in a recent um, presentation that I did. A version of this is that you don't have to start with like intense clinical social work applications of AI. You can start very easy. Like I might suggest just go to pick a tool, Chat GPT, let's say, and start with super simple stuff. Hey, how do um, what's a recipe I can make tonight using carrots and pork chops? I don't know. Like what can I cook for dinner tonight that is high in protein and low in calories or whatever? Like just ask it everyday questions that they don't have any implication on work or ethics or legality. They're just questions. What's the best food for my dog? Can you give me an exercise routine for a new mom, or any just things like that, and just um, start very basic, very simple, very in a way that's comfortable for you, that doesn't again have anything to do with your work. And I will also this is like a little, I think it's, I don't know if it's necessarily like a cheat code, but it's something that I find most people don't do, they're really missing out on a lot of what AI can do. So a lot of people, for instance, will ask like, give me a recipe for dinner tonight that uses cauliflower and broccoli. So the AI easily will give you a response. Or you can say, give me 5 different options for recipes using these ingredients. And it'll give you those responses. And a lot of people, that's where it stops. They'll just take whatever they want from that and they're off. They go do what they do. But the kind of where you'll get more out of a lot of these tools, and to your question, will help you kind of start learning and getting comfortability with them, is asking follow-up questions. That maybe you choose one, or they give you 5 options, and maybe you say, tell me more about um, option number 3, but how can I also incorporate green bean, excuse me, and um, Brussels sprouts. So it'll, give you something more. And then you can say, my husband is on a um, keto diet. How can I, use that, or how can I create well, I don't know, whatever. Like the point being is that you continue to kind of have this back and forth conversation with an AI, so you can drill down or kind of get more useful information with each question to get you to where you want to be. And that as you get more comfortable, and if you decide to then use it in work that you do, that will also help you in those areas, because you can then ask, what's the best way to work with teenage fathers in a rural setting? And it'll give you a response. And a lot of people will take that response and run with it. But you can say, what about for a Spanish speaking only population from Venezuela? And then it might give you more information. And then you can say, how would I integrate the fact that many of these boys have experienced trauma? And then it will give you more. So you, in that way, you kind of slowly, first of all, build your comfortability just with easy questions at home, maybe. But then as you transition to more professional use cases, potentially, it also will help you to refine your responses to get better responses and more responses that are more reflective of what you're trying to do. So, in a nutshell, I think to get comfortable for those who are new, don't put any pressure on yourself. Don't make it harder than it needs to be to start. Just ask stuff that is useful to you in daily work. How do I get my baby to stop crying? Whatever it is, and just, build from there. This is an ever evolving area, just like anything that we ever do. You don't start as an expert, you start simple and build from there. So hopefully, and that's what I did. I didn't start asking these super complex questions. I started with easy stuff and built from there. So I would say that's a good way to approach it.
Ernesto, I can just give an example. The way I have used AI has evolved very significantly because the technology continues to develop. But for example, I work with kiddos. So I just, for purposes here, I asked it, what are some therapeutic activities I can do with a 12-year-old in therapy? It popped out 10 things. It said you can do writing or journaling, role playing, mindfulness, deep breathing. So I sometimes use it just as a starter to get my brain working a little bit. Obviously, I have to tailor it then. Not every 12-year-old's going to want to do every single activity that was listed, but it's good to have in your toolbox. Like, I'm trying to think of one. Create a comic strip. Ask the child to create a comic strip that tells a story about a situation they're dealing with. I would not have thought of that, but I have some kids that love comics. I'm like, okay, that's a really good idea. So I use it for those purposes, sometimes to just get, when you're feeling like your brain is stuck and you're like, oh, I can't think of anything and I have a session in an hour, what should I do? That has been really helpful. And then also I've used it to actually build rapport with clients. I've used this example. I might have a client that's really into like anime and I don't know much about it. I don't want to be inauthentic and pretend that I know, but I do educate myself a little bit. I might type in the name of the show just so I have a sense of what it is they're talking to me about. So I say, like, you can definitely tailor it to what you need, but the best thing that I can say, how I started, was using it kind of like a Google. Like, this is kind of what I'm dealing with. This is what I want to know. And it starts to give you some information. So that's how I started it. And then obviously it has evolved through there, but it's really good for just generating ideas.
Yeah, and I think well, one of two things. Number one, I know Megan, in the past when we've worked together, you mentioned in your school, in your work that you're doing in school, you've used it. One of the ways that's an easy entry, kind of a transition maybe from personal use to professional use, is to help maybe go over like a super long PDF document or like a research piece of research. Maybe you don't have the time or the ability or energy to read through the entire study, but you can, let's say there's a link to this particular PDF. So you can copy the link in this case and paste it into an AI tool and say, please explain this to me at a 12th grade level using the style of Shakespeare. You could, if you wanted to do that, whatever prompt you give it, or you could just say, break this down for me using bullet points. And it will read that PDF document, the entire study, and in a matter of seconds, it will give you whatever you want, whether it's Shakespeare version or bullet points or whatever. And you can kind of, in that way, when needed, use it to break down a PDF, a research document, even a website. Like, you can click on, paste in a link from a particular website and say, hey, what is this organization all about? and it'll give you a breakdown about that. So those are easy ways that are not too, you don't have to really consider confidentiality or ethics too much, but they can be super helpful in streamlining your work and saving you some time. And there's a million ways to do that. And then the other thing I wanted to say, there was a question from Annette Olson, who, thank you for your participation here, but it says, how can I teach parents about confidentiality and my use of AI? So that literally is a prompt, a question that you can put into an AI tool and probably get a much better, quicker, better response than what I can provide you. I can give you an answer right now, but I would challenge you to ask that exact, like copy that question and paste it into ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever tool you want, and see what it gives you. Likely, it's going to give you like a numbered response, like 1 through 5 or whatever, and give you tools and approaches and all these different ways to approach that. So that's an example actually of an easy kind of non-threatening way that you can use AI in the work. Just ask it questions like that. How can I teach parents about AI confidentiality? You're going to get a very robust response in most cases. And again, that's a way for those who are just getting into it and just learning it to safely kind of get their, kind of get into the tools and get comfortable with them.
I just quickly want to touch, Ernesto. Thank you for bringing up. Yes, I'm in a doctoral program right now, and it has saved me so much time because I do not, it's for full time professionals. I don't have time to read every single research article. I would never get through school. So you actually, Chat GPT is what I use, and it has become more advanced. Before you couldn't upload a PDF. Now you can upload a PDF and say, what are the 5 key points? Or like, for example, research can be very theoretical. So it might say, here's a theory. And I still don't, I read the document, I still don't understand it. I will say, explain it to me like I'm 8 years old. It will break it down to a level and then I can give it more prompts from there. But it really allows me to take control of the learning in a way that's going to work for me. Someone else might prompt it a different way, but it's really, really good if you're struggling with concepts, if you're in more of like an academia or research space, or you're just like curious. It can really break it down. And for research, that has been very helpful to me because some of the terms are like way over my head and I don't understand what it's saying. But ChatGPT has allowed it to give me the information on a level that works for me.
Yes, exactly. So I think, yeah, when we first started talking about this, Megan, that they didn't have the ability to upload the PDFs, and now you can upload documents. And just as we kind of finish off this section, I'll just give a little, as I mentioned before, I said that a lot of my responses might have said, as we are today, as AI can't do this today. Like today, in this moment, maybe AI doesn't have these capabilities, but just in the past couple of months, some of the things that have AI has kind of started doing on a lot of the tools, it can. So one of the things is, before it was just text. You just type stuff in and it gives you back text responses. Now it's much more. It has integration of voice, and not just voice, but it's voice that seemingly has, it's mimicking kind of emotion and a little bit more. It feels like empathy sometimes, or it's closer to actual human interaction. So like I say, I don't know where this technology is going to be in a few years, but right now this presentation is built on what it is now, but it's advancing quickly. The other thing is, it actually can now take in image or video. So when I talked about how AI can't really understand like human emotion or some of the nuances in human-centered work, it's getting closer to that because it can identify facial expressions or features, and it might say like, hey, if you're using this tool that's using video, it might say, hey, you look a little bit angry, what's going on? Or it can kind of begin to start recognizing that and responding in real time. So the way that these tools are changing and advancing, is very quick. But I mean, again, the question is, do we just sit here and cross our fingers and hope it goes away and just don't do anything? Or do we try to learn along with it and be those at the forefront that can adapt to these super dynamic AI models? I had one other thing to say, but I kind of forgot what it was. But yeah, so these things are developing very quickly and in ways that are getting closer to being, closer to the work that we do. But I still do believe at the end of the day, the part that I think is still very far AI, it separates us from AI, is when you're sitting across from a person that you're working with. And some of you, oh, sorry about that. That's my usual Saturday morning wake up alarm. But if you're sitting across from an individual working with a super traumatic experience, maybe it's domestic violence, maybe it's you're working doing sex trafficking or things like that, there is almost like a vibration in the room. There's an energy in the room that it's not an AI, even if it's using video, it's not going to pick up on that energy, on that. I mean, I'm getting chills even thinking about doing that kind of work because it's so human to human focus that I believe the AI is still far from that. So, oh, what I was going to say is there was a study in like a medical setting where they were looking for how empathetic a model could be. And so the patients didn't know in this scenario, I think, whether they were dealing with a human or an AI. And it turns out that the patients found the AI interactions to be more empathetic, to be more client centered, client focused than the actual humans. And so it can mimic what it thinks and what we train it to show as empathy or interest or compassion or curiosity. But again, that gut level energy vibe situation of working with people, that I don't think that is going to be replicated by AI anytime soon. Maybe in the future, but that's where we are clearly differentiated from these tools. So that being said, I don't know. So Megan, I think I'm ready to take a little break here, but I don't know if there's any last things we want to do on this section or anything you
No,
want
I
to.
think this was great discussion, and I hope that everyone's at least having some food for thought here. And also, we didn't really touch on this, Ernesto, but AI has been here. I don't know if how many of you have an Alexa in your house. That's AI. It uses our voice. If you use Gmail and it suggests, sometimes it's like, here's when it can fill in what it thinks you want to type. Netflix recommendations. AI is already being used in a lot of ways. I think now in general, the population's just being more alert to it. So it's been there. We use it every day. So it's not like this is something that just, came out of nowhere in the past year and a half. It just continues to evolve. So you are probably using AI multiple times throughout the day without thinking about using AI throughout the day. So just we can leave it with that. But Ernesto, do you want to do a 10-minute break or a 15-minute break?
Um, I think 15 will
Okay.
be okay with me.
So I have 33 after the hour. So if everyone, wherever you are, whatever time zone, if you come back at 48 after the hour, that will be great. So take some time, take a break, do what you got to do, and we will come back in 15 minutes.
Thank you, everyone.
And Ernesto, we're ready to start part 2 whenever you are.
All righty. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a nice little break there and are ready to power through here and get through these last couple sections. So that first section is a section that I am a little more familiar with, but these next two sections are going to be the first time I present them. So feel free to contribute in any way you like in the chat, or Megan, if you want to break in, or anybody to also inform some of what we'll talk about here. But these two sections that we're going to talk about are the ethics of telehealth in social work, or the ethics of telehealth, and also the ethics of social media. So let's go ahead and get started here with telehealth and just talk about some of the ethical implications there. So before we even get into it, just for a little context and background, you know, probably some of you in here had this experience where prior to COVID, telehealth, at least from what I saw, was relatively sometimes frowned upon, or there was at least a group of people who thought that individual work, one-to-one work, work with clients could only really be done face to face. And there is, I believe, something to that. There is something to the opinion that live face to face, like in the same room, in the same space, interaction, there's something to that. But at some point during COVID, when we were forced into that situation, a lot of people began to see, and I think most people then began to see, that it was at least possible to do some of the work that we do using these telehealth kind of platforms, or I don't even, again, this is not necessarily the work that I do day to day, so I don't know all the platforms specifically that are used, but it became pretty evident that the work could at least be done in a reasonable way using these telehealth platforms. And so ever since then, it seems to have become a reality. Obviously, we've returned, depending on where you are and the work that you do, we've returned to live, in person, face to face kind of work, but telehealth remains part of the reality of this kind of work. And so with that being said, we have to, if that's going to continue to be part of the work, as professionals, as social workers, as clinicians, whatever your role may be, we still need to then think about how can we implement these tools and these practices in an ethical way. And so that's the overarching backdrop for this particular section. So telehealth, similar to AI, it's still rooted in the same core principles that have always, or that guide our profession in general. And traditional in-person social work or clinical practice, it's still guided by those same things that have always guided us when we're using telehealth, as they did, previous to telehealth. Some of those being similar to AI: confidentiality, informed consent, and commitment to do no harm. All the things that you were part of your reality prior to this COVID quote unquote revolution with telehealth. They're still part of the core principles that need to be adhered to when using or utilizing telehealth. Um, but we need to look at those ethical challenges and really examine how we're using these tools. So I'm going to go through a similar process to what we did through AI, and I'll just provide kind of some challenges in some certain particular areas and some questions or considerations with regards to telehealth and the ethics of telehealth. So the first one is confidentiality and privacy. So obviously, when you are using telehealth, or when you're doing using whatever platform you're using, in most scenarios, you're not in the same space. Like, somebody typically is at their home or in their own home office or wherever they may be, and you're in your home office. I mean, I've seen people in their bedrooms and their kitchens. So you're in very different settings than what you typically would have been in an office setting, whether it's in a large building or, a small office, whatever it may have been. It's very different settings, and that different setting and the tools that you need to use in that setting bring up some different challenges than when you were sitting in the same room together. And so those challenges might include um, hacking. Like, somebody could be hacking into your system. I was hacked a year or something ago, and it's not fun, but hacking is a reality. Or even insecure internet connection. So people, like, sometimes you see people that say you shouldn't use the internet, like at a Starbucks or something like that, because somebody could hack into in a public setting like that, someone could hack into your internet and get into your system. Even at your own house, somebody could be parked out in front doing that. So there are these kind of technical challenges that present issues potentially with confidentiality and privacy. And so those are like the technical issues. And then, you know, in your home, you might not have the same level of privacy. Like you might have a spouse or children or someone that are in another room or whatever, but they're around. And so, how much can you ensure the privacy of the the work that you're doing? You could be using earbuds and that potentially helps, or earphones, some level of audio, but you're still speaking and you're still saying stuff. And so, that potentially poses challenges to privacy and confidentiality. So there's these different levels of, or different challenges that present themselves in terms of protecting privacy when we are in a telehealth setting that likely were not as much of a situation or as much of a concern in an enclosed private office setting. And so, that being said, the ethical consideration, that's something to think about, is you need to take precautions to safeguard client information, such as using encrypted platforms. So I'm assuming most of the platforms that people are using when they're doing telehealth are secure encrypted platforms. So they're not just like you're not using what's it called, Instagram, like the thing that you can chat back and forth on Instagram. You're not using like a social media platform or like maybe FaceTime or something like that. Like most people, I believe, are using an official encrypted safe platform to do telehealth. And if you're not, you should be, because that's the best way to try to ensure that the confidentiality and privacy of that information that's being transmitted is secure. Um, and you should also, along with that, that's kind of the technical piece, but also establishing your own guidelines or protocols in your home or in your home office as to how to best protect privacy. So maybe you only schedule sessions when nobody else is home, or maybe you're in a complete separate building in the backyard or something that you've converted into an office. You need to try to establish an environment that, as best as possible, protects confidentiality and privacy. And also, you want to have a discussion with those that you're working with to make sure that they are, as best as possible, in an environment that also is private to them, and protects any confidential information they want to share. That can become a barrier to participation in the the therapeutic process if they're not feeling safe or comfortable that what they're sharing is not going to be heard by even their own family or somebody else in the other room or something where they are. So these are all things to consider, not only the technical aspects of protecting privacy, but the just practical real life implications of practicing, of holding sessions in a home or a home office or whatever the setting may be. And so the question to consider around this particular area is, what are effective telehealth practices to protect privacy? And so one of them, I mean, Megan, thank you, confirmed, do not use social media for client sessions. This is a huge no-no. A lot of the stuff that we talk about, whether it's with AI or telehealth or social media, at a certain point, I kind of made an assumption that, of course, every social worker, every clinician, everyone knows these things. I don't even need to talk about them. But as I've gone through my career, and even especially with the AI stuff, I've learned that we can't assume that people know some of these things that maybe those of us who are more experienced take as a given. We have a lot of new people in the profession who don't have as much experience, or they've been bombarded with information and they're just trying to settle in on what's okay, what's not okay. And they may not know necessarily that social media is not the appropriate place to hold a session. Maybe they're working with the youth and they say, oh, let's just do it on Instagram. And they think that's okay. And it's not. So we have to, some of these things that maybe experienced social workers or clinicians may take as a given, it's not always a given. And people are at different phases of their understanding of these technologies and just the work in general. And so we do need to cover them and even give ourselves reminders.
Presto, if
But
I could just jump in real quick.
yes,
We like you said, like we assume this is a known, but you always hear those horror stories like where someone is getting um action taken against them because they slipped up or something. These things do happen. So, for example, maybe you go to screen share with a client during a session and you had someone else's case notes up, right? That's a huge breach of confidentiality. Or I've heard some people are writing an email to their clients and they forgot to blind carbon copy them. And now everyone knows who each other is on the email. So there are things that can happen just by being humans and making mistakes. So just be careful. And sometimes we're so reliant on the technology, we do things quickly without thinking. So make sure you have safeguards in place so you don't run into these type of problems.
yes, thank you, Megan, and feel free to jump in whenever and at this part of the presentation. And also with each slide for everyone else who's in here, you'll see at the bottom of each one the question, one single question. So if you see that question, if at any point as I'm talking, feel free to respond or provide thoughts on that question in the chat. So that's confidentiality and privacy in telehealth. Similar to AI, we have informed consent. So just as in AI is a new tool for everybody, telehealth is not very much older than AI that to a lot of people, and many people don't even know really what it is. Even practitioners may not really be. Now, I'm not that knowledgeable about telehealth because it's not right now part of a lot of the work that I do, and so people aren't familiar with the technology. The people that we work with are not necessarily always super familiar with. They might know Zoom or they might know FaceTime or whatever, but do they know, fill in the blank platform that's specifically used for telehealth? Likely no, in many cases. And so we need to inform them about just what these platforms are, how they function, how they protect privacy, how they're encrypted, all the kinds of things that we talked about in the past, the previous slide. And similarly, they should know, the people that you're working with should know that they do have the option to not use telehealth and do in-person sessions if that's something that is possible, if it's something that you're able to provide and if it's what they prefer. So it's not necessarily that someone feels forced into using a platform that they're not comfortable with. They need to provide consent to participate on those platforms. So the ethical consideration is that social workers or clinicians, therapists, they need to ensure that informed consent, again, back to the AI one, it has a clear explanation of what you're using, how you're using it, what are the risks and benefits to this platform, this telehealth approach that you're taking, how their information is used, how it's protected, all these kinds of things. And then again, it's not just that you inform them about that and you're good. They need to provide actual consent that they're okay with that. And they should know what their rights are even moving forward if they decide to not be comfortable with it anymore or want to change their consent. They need to know that that is within their ability to do so. So the question for this one would be, what should be done if a client prefers in-person sessions, but you do not offer them? So let's say I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I've seen some clinicians or therapists who only do telehealth. They only provide online services. And so you may get a referral or you may, come into contact with a potential client, someone that wants to work with you, but they're not comfortable with telehealth. Maybe they don't know the technology, maybe they don't have the space in their home to have privacy, whatever their reason may be. They're not comfortable with it, but they want to work with you, but you are not doing in-person sessions. You're only doing telehealth. So in those situations, what should be done? How do you handle that? Uh, So refer out, Angela says. I think that is an easy one. And that's also why it's important to establish and maintain your professional networks, because whether or not it's this scenario where somebody's just wanting a service that you don't provide, but sometimes you can provide the service, but you're just, beyond your capacity or whatever. So it's always good to have these networks that you can make sure that a client who is in need of services can receive them in the way that best works for them. But again, back to the point, whether it's working with you or whoever, they should always um, have informed consent, particularly when using telehealth platforms. Let's see. Talk about the options you offer and if there are other options. Yes, exactly. So this particular one is not just about the client needs, the person you're working with. It's about your needs as well. Um, so you need to make sure that they know that there are options for them in person if they need them. This doesn't have to only be telehealth just because that's what you provide.
And Ernesto, I'll just jump in real quick because I work with kids, and so many times parents are like, my kid can do telehealth. And I'm like, I don't think that's going to be the best. Your child's 4. So I'll have those discussions too. Like, it's best for a child to probably, I mean, I've done this enough that it's not going to be beneficial. Or I've had to have conversations with parents that maybe a 45-minute session is not appropriate if we're going to be on the computer. Maybe a 30-minute session is appropriate. And I've had some cases where we try it out and it's just not working. Like the kid's very distracted, or they're never finding a private place. They're trying to hop on calls from Starbucks. So that's when, as a clinician, we have to use our judgment of, is this beneficial, or is it best that we find them a different option? But also has to work for you. If you're not feeling like it's working for you for them to be in the virtual setting and you're not making therapeutic progress, you can have those conversations. And just, I don't think that the virtual setting with me is the best option. Here are some other options you can inquire about.
Exactly. Thank you, Megan. So we'll move on to this next section, cultural competence and accessibility. So when using telehealth, it can be super helpful sometimes for, let's say, a lot of times where I live, there are challenges with clients, particularly in child welfare, when they are required to attend therapy. But in order to get to a therapist's office, especially pre-COVID, like they have to take 3, 4 different buses, and it takes 2.5 hours to get across town, and then they have a parenting class back over here, and then they have to go to work, and all these different challenges. So telehealth can definitely provide an option for people who don't have accessibility sometimes to get to their therapist's office in the real world scenario. But it also, we kind of talked about it already, can provide challenges for some people and exacerbate or increase the disparities that we have with the people that we provide care to. So, for instance, not everybody has access to the technology. A lot of people do have cell phones at this point. Even people that are having challenges in their lives economically or whatever. You see people still with cell phones. So access to some of these platforms may not be as much of an issue, but they may not have access to private spaces. I know where I live is super expensive, and so sometimes there's multiple families living in a house or a garage or all number of different living scenarios. And so to have a private space, just like a corner of a room, is sometimes a luxury, much less like an enclosed actual private area. So to try to do telehealth for some people that we work with, it may be impossible for them to have a private, confidential space. And so that's something we want to consider when we're thinking about accessibility to telehealth for some of the people that we work with. And also some people may not be comfortable or knowledgeable with how to use the tools, and there's work that you can do to familiarize them, to train them. But again, it's another thing to consider in terms of accessibility. Like, does this individual or is this population that you're working with, do they need additional support and help to be able to access these platforms and know how to navigate them? So you want to make sure that you're conscious and aware of that in order to perform ethical telehealth services. And then the ethical consideration for this is that, and it will lead into the question, but it says here social workers have a responsibility to ensure equitable access to services that meet the specific needs and capabilities of their clients. So to the extent possible, therapists, clinicians, social workers, like, we're always looking for equitable access to services, and we want to make sure that a certain population or an individual is denied or missing out on the assistance that they need because they don't have access to it. So that's always at top of mind for the work that we're doing. And like I mentioned, it could provide extra support, extra training, extra, um, you know, resources that an individual may need to get access to some of these technologies. It may require extra work on your part as the clinician, the therapist, the provider, in order to be able to provide telehealth to all these different populations. But the question that we talked about in the previous one, it's also about you. So the question is, are you obligated to meet every access need of your clients, even if you do not have the capacity to do so? So if the scenario where somebody doesn't have a private space, a confidential space, a space where they feel comfortable participating in telehealth, how much of an obligation or responsibility can you have to making sure that they have that? You can do what you can, but what are the ethics around your ability to provide that for them and their ability to receive services? Like, how do you strike that balance between the service you provide and the environment they're able to have in order to receive those services? And maybe you're working with someone who doesn't have a laptop or a cell phone or any kind of any kind of device. They need telehealth because they can't make it to their therapist and back to the parenting class in time. And so they have this technical challenge, or they don't have internet in their house. The landlord is not fixing the antenna or whatever it is. And so, what obligation do you have as the provider to solve all of these issues for the individual in order to provide services to them? That's an ethical kind of consideration that you need to think about in terms of providing services, but also making those what you're providing realistic to your own capacity and what you can provide. So there is that one. Let me see if there's anything. I work on a community granted rural areas. Yeah, so some I didn't in rural areas, that's also a great example of where telehealth is extremely helpful when people sometimes are miles and miles and miles away from the nearest clinician, and so telehealth becomes a very viable option. But then sometimes also that isolation can, less so I think as technology improves, but it can also be a barrier to these platforms. Do they have internet? Do they have secure, consistent internet that can handle these the bandwidth needed by these platforms? So there's all those kinds of things to consider as ethical challenges when you're doing telework or telehealth, as it applies to specifically accessibility. So the next one is boundaries and professionalism. So because somehow for some people it may seem when you're in an office setting, it's easier to to kind of have this professional relationship, and you are the practitioner and they are the client, or they're the person that you're working with, and it's easier in some ways for some people to establish that and maintain that kind of those boundaries and that relationship. But when you are sitting in your home office and you're on your webcam and they're sitting on their bed in their home and you can see them there, it can become a little more tricky to kind of maintain a boundary between a professional relationship and personal, because it's very personal when you're at home and they're at home, and it's just a different kind of feeling than when you're both sitting in an office doing this work. And so that establishing and maintaining those kinds of boundaries between personal and professional is an added consideration, but it is obviously an ethical consideration because we need to have those boundaries. We can't just make this super informal, like, just because the setting is quote unquote more informal doesn't mean that the relationship and the work automatically it should be informal as well to match their bedroom setting. And so let's see, social workers must maintain clear professional boundaries even in a virtual setting. This includes ensuring that telehealth interactions remain professional, limiting personal disclosures, and using professional secure platforms rather than informal communication methods like texting or social media. So we talked about those things. We really, using every way that we can, we want to establish these kind of this arrangement, this relationship, that it's very clear that this is a professional relationship. We are not, we're not just two people chatting on Zoom. This is professional work that we're doing, and that needs to be made very clear and established, whether it's a discussion up front or ongoing discussion throughout your work with this individual. But just because the setting, the way that things are kind of arranged when you're doing telehealth, it's almost like a constant reminder that, hey, I know you're laying on your bed, but we're doing a therapy session here. Maybe, I don't, maybe someone else can speak to this, but maybe, you establish that boundary that, hey, when we're doing work here, I need you to be, sitting in front of your computer, not laying, holding your laptop up, laying on your bed or something like that. Maybe that's part of how you establish and maintain your professional boundaries. So, what are some of the ways to maintain professionalism when the client and the practitioner are both in their homes? So I've given a few examples, but um, let me see what I see here, or if Megan wants to jump in. Blur the background to make it look a little less personal. That's one thing
Yes.
that,
We had asked in the chat just what are some things people do to maintain the professional boundaries at home and make sure that the space is still work time. And I worked in schools, and I remember at the beginning of when school went virtual, we'd have kids showing up without their shirts. They're bringing the computer into the bathroom, right? Like, and then this becomes a problem because it's like, well, like this can be really problematic. So having those discussions, ending the session if you need to, if it's like getting into a space that's uncomfortable for you as well.
yeah, and I love these comments too that talk about dressing professionally as if they were in the office, continuing to kind of keep your routine that you would have in an office setting, because I think it is easy, and again, I don't do this work specifically, but it would become to me easy to over time kind of feel more comfortable, feel more at ease. Maybe, I woke up late today, I just throw on a hoodie and sit, turn on my computer. Like, it's easy to settle into that as we become comfortable with these technologies, and that begins to then blur those professional personal lines. And so I think keeping up routines, having an actual schedule, or, waking up, taking a shower, combing your hair, doing your makeup, if that's something you do, getting dressed, like all those things that, number one, for yourself, continue to remind you that this is professional work. And number two, it sends a very clear message to the other side that I'm here to do work. I'm not here to just chit chat. And so that is, and again, I think it's about finding a balance between kind of meeting the client where they are and understanding their reality, the space that they have, their knowledge about these platforms, about this kind of work, like understanding their perspective and seeing it through their lens, but also kind of again establishing and maintaining professional boundaries and making that clear to those that we are working with. So emergencies and crisis intervention, I think this is, again, this is new to me, but I found this one to be particularly important. So if you're sitting in the same room, and where I'm from, let's say there's earthquakes, and so if you're sitting in the same room and there's an earthquake while you're in session, it's easy to, or easier to kind of, with the client, to kind of respond to that and do what you need to do when there's an earthquake. And then after the earthquake, like work, process through it and everything you need to do. But when you're in a telehealth situation, if I'm here and my client is 20 miles away and there's an earthquake, we both feel it. But what do they do? What do I do? What is our protocol for, do we reconvene? Is the session over? Like whatever. Like that's one example. But more um, specifically or more applicable, maybe there's an emergency like a client or a crisis situation where a client expresses suicidal ideation, or they have some kind of a mental health crisis or breakdown. Like again, when you're in the same room, it is potentially much easier to deal with that in real time in the same room, as it's much easier than when you're looking at a screen and seeing this happening, and what are you supposed to do if they are going through this on the other end of things. And so establishing upfront kind of like processes and safety plans with the client that, hey, if you're ever feeling this kind of way, or expressing these kinds of things, this is how we're going to deal with it. Or also making sure that you're clear where they are when they are receiving your services, so that if you need to bring in emergency services, where they are and where to direct those services, because otherwise they could be anywhere in the world and all you see is their screen, their camera. And so it's important to know where they are, so that if you need to, because you can't access them, you can deploy whatever emergency services that need to go there to help them in real life, because you can't do it obviously through the screen, or you're limited in how you can address those situations. So it's important to have those protocols in place and know that information when you are working with someone. In case you need it, you can respond with the appropriate information that you need um, to handle the situation in real time. So how can you check in with the client at the beginning of each session to ensure you're ready for any potential crisis situation? So what is it at the beginning of your overall work with them, like session number one, that you establish every session you're going to be in this place at this time at this address, and if you go through these kinds of emotions or feelings and I need to help you further, this is how we're going to handle it? Like, do you establish that all up front? Is it a reminder with each session and a check-in? Hey, are you in the normal place? Are you still at the same address? Like, how do you make sure that you know everything you need to know in case you need to put some kind of crisis scenario into place? How do you make sure you know that? Because ethically, you are, responsible for this work that you're having together, but you're not able to respond as you would be in an office setting. So, what can you put into place to respond in those scenarios? And I see a lot of stuff flying up here in the chat that I can't read it all. Safety first, safety plans for hypothetical situations. I have some in place over the years. Yeah, sometimes, I think that back to the idea of being comfortable as you're working with 3, 5, 10, however many clients you're working with a day. It's easy to just get into a routine and just go to the next one and the next one and the next one, and you get overwhelmed. Maybe you're not taking the amount of breaks that you need, and it's easy to overlook, hey, at any second, at any moment, something could happen, and I need to be prepared for that. So it's important to remind yourself and to um, ideally make it part of your practice that you are checking in with this information so that you can use it when you need to and be ethically responsible for anything that may arise during a session. Megan says also review your state licensing requirements. That is hugely important. You may not be able to see someone residing or visiting a different state yet. I know there's a lot of stuff going on with that right now, but certainly make sure that you are aware of your state licensing requirements because they're not always the same at this time. So were kind of the ethical implications, some of the ethical implications of using telehealth and just things to consider to make sure that we are practicing in an ethical way, but also in a realistic way with a lot of these new challenges that are arising on all the technical platforms that are at our, in our grasp at this point in time. So now we're going to get a little more. This is the final section, and we're going to get into the ethical use of social media in social work or our work with families. And so this one, as I mentioned earlier this morning, is one that's it's the one that's been around the longest with regards to AI, telehealth, and social work. So I don't remember 2004, 2006, maybe I got on Facebook. There was MySpace and stuff before that, but really there's been at this point kind of several decades of social media that has existed. And over the course of maybe the last decade ish, social media has kind of integrated itself more into the work that we do because it's become such a huge part of people's lives. And so, whether you're 50 something years old like me or 15 years old like someone you might be working with, it might not be the same platform. It might be Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, TikTok. It's different platforms, but the ethical use of these platforms remains consistent, regardless of what the platform is. So we're going to talk about some of that stuff. Similar to telehealth, because it's social media is a way that many people express their personal beliefs, personal thoughts, show parts of their personal lives. It's it's easy to just think of it as a personal thing, but social media is sometimes often used. I've seen it used at least by. It's the only way maybe that a social worker can communicate with a youth in their that they're working with. It's probably not the best practice, but sometimes I've seen social workers who are only able to message their teenage client through Instagram, at least to say, hey, call me or something like that. And so, it is a reality of the work that we do. Social media is there. And because it's there, it introduces privacy risks, similar to all these other new technologies, that it challenges the relationships that we have. Is this personal? Is this professional? Is there confidentiality here? Is how private is this communication? All those same ethical questions arise when using social media. So again, as you see, as we all know, hopefully, confidentiality and privacy is a cornerstone of any work that we do, whether it's AI, telehealth, social media. None of those technologies change some of these foundational cornerstone elements of the work that we do. We might, the application of these tools might look very different than they did 25 years ago, but confidentiality still looks pretty much the same. Privacy looks the same. Informed consent, like all these concepts don't change with technology. They're still the cornerstone of the work that we do. And so This one I think is very important that I've seen happen in social media, because sometimes I've seen social workers who are conscious, they're aware of confidentiality and privacy, and they're very clearly conscious that they're not going to share this person's name or identifying information. But I've seen people where they put a post like, you know, ugh, my teenage mom client is getting on my nerves today, or something like that. It doesn't specifically say their name. It doesn't necessarily give any identifying information. But first of all, it's just probably not the best thing to post anyway. But also, like, there may be enough there for someone to be able to identify or speculate who you're talking about, and just kind of get some insight into who you're talking about. And that begins to breach those levels of privacy and confidentiality that a person should expect when they're working with you. So if I'm in child welfare and, I'm in the system, my case got assigned to you, I shouldn't expect that you're going to be on your own social media kind of commenting about me and my situation, even if you're not giving my name or whatever. Like, it just shouldn't be a part of how you're practicing in your work with me. But I've seen it happen. And so we need to remember, as part of our ethical considerations, that it requires that the work requires that we protect our client's identity in direct or indirect ways, whether it's their specific identity, their location, their circumstances, because people can, um, backwards engineer sometimes, or figure out who you're talking to just by the context, or just by the thing, or who you're talking about, just by the context that you give or the comments that you're making. And that is breaching that person's confidentiality. And so we need to be very careful about those indirect or contextual clues that we might give in a post, even when we think that we're being ethical, because we're not saying their name or their, anything identifying directly. But it's not really ethically um a good thing to do, because people can still figure it out. And even beyond someone figuring out, I mean, I would hope that most of us would just see something like that as just an, if at a bare minimum, unprofessional to kind of be posting those kinds of things. We can, vent with our colleagues, or, process with our supervisor and do those kinds of things in a professional setting, in a professional manner. But it's inappropriate, I would say, to be posting things like, even like that, ugh, my teenage client is killing me today, or whatever, is getting on my nerves. So what are some examples of confidentiality breaches that may occur through contextual clues? So again, I gave that example of just, my teenage client is getting on my nerves. But you could say, my court date today was such a pain. I wish these people would show up on time. That's not saying anyone's name. That's not giving any specific information. But A, how professional is a comment like that? And B, can someone speculate about who you're talking about, and therefore kind of get some context about the work that you're doing with that individual or family that supposedly is confidential? So there's a million different examples of how you can indirectly breach that confidentiality, and it's something that we need to keep in mind to maintain our ethical standards with social media. So so boundary issues are very common as well with social media, specifically sometimes with younger clients, younger people that we're working with, but not necessarily. It could be also adults. So, maybe you've been able to connect, like I mentioned, with, I've seen times when people have used, I think it was, I'm almost positive it was Instagram, that's like the only social media I think that youth looked at. They didn't really respond to text messages or whatever. But if the social worker just messaged them in Instagram and said, call me, I need to talk to you, or whatever, that was the only way they could get any response or connect with them. And so they used that, and I mean, that's one example that I can think of. But when you're using a platform, a social media platform like Instagram, it can become easy, particularly for the client, but even for yourself, to begin to blur those lines between what kind of because likely sometimes if you message someone on a social media platform, they're going to respond back in that same platform, and now you're potentially engaged in a conversation. And because it's an informal kind of just social platform, that conversation, they may kind of start directing it in a way that blurs those lines between professional and personal. So, social workers are ethically required to maintain clear and appropriate boundaries with clients to avoid dual relationships and conflicts of interest. They should have clear policies regarding social media interactions with clients. So, you may be, again, clear about how you're using this tool. Hey, I'm only using it because that's the only way I can contact my youth to talk to them. But to them, they may think, "Oh, cool, they're messaging me on Instagram. Let's just chit chat here," or I'm going to send them a picture of me and my girlfriend, or I'm going to, send them a picture of me and my homies buying some weed or whatever. Like it can very quickly snowball into something that it shouldn't be. And so that's why it's very important that you establish clear policies regarding social media interaction with clients. Ideally, you probably want to completely steer clear of interactions on social media with your clients, but sometimes in the course of your work, if it's necessary, then you should have very clear boundaries and guidelines such that you don't find yourself in one of those awkward situations where now you thought it was clear that it was professional, but they are sending you weird stuff and it's just becomes a mess. So, what are some examples of social media policies that a social worker might use when working with a client? And let's see. Let me take a look at some of what we have here. That seemed okay to message a client on social media to have a separate conversation in a safer space. Yeah, I thought also, thank you, Angela. In that scenario, I did think, because that literally, from my understanding, that was the only way that that particular youth would respond to the social worker. Excuse me. But again, it can easily and quickly become a slippery slope where your understanding of that social media interaction and their understanding of it are very different. And then what do you do if they send you illegal or inappropriate images or videos? Like, now you find yourself in a quandary. Maybe you're going to need to, make a report or go into a whole different part of the work that you weren't expecting. And it's just, it can create a big mess. So yeah, it's possible to use it in certain scenarios, but you just want to be very careful and clear that the boundaries that are established and maintained to the extent possible are understood both ways. Um, Everything is tracked online, and associations seem easy to be made between a social worker and an individual. Yeah, Annette, thank you for that and all your contributions here. Yeah, everything is anything you post on these platforms is public, is trackable, and connections can be made between your friends or followers or whatever on these platforms. And so the boundary, the confidentiality is very important to be hyper conscious of these things when we're engaging and interacting on social media. Professionalism and conduct. So this one, a lot of these two, as social media has become a part of our most people's lives, um, I've seen that social workers have understood, they've understood the assignment, and I see less and less instances when some of these situations come up, but they do still come up. And so, we are, as social workers, we hold ourselves, hopefully in most cases, to a fairly high standard of behavior, of just our participation in society in some sense. and those reflect the values of our professional values, whether we're in the grocery store or in the office or whatever it may be. And because we might be able to hopefully maintain boundaries between our personal life and our professional life, but we may see people that we're working with at the grocery store or at the softball game or wherever, and they still see us as my social worker or my counselor or my caseworker. And so your behavior, your things you say, things that you, how you present yourself in the real world is sometimes, seen by those who we're working with as not your personal presentation, but your professional presentation, if that makes sense, hopefully. So, and what like, so like back in my younger days, when I would be working with youth, and I'd have relationships with those youth parents, and then I would do my work with the youth during the day, but then at night I would go out with my friends and be out on the town, and I would see you know people that I'm working with, or I'm working with their kids, and it can be sometimes a very gray line between, like, you try to just not acknowledge, and hopefully they don't see you and you don't see them, but sometimes they'll run up on you and say, hey, start talking. And so it is a skill that we need to develop to kind of acknowledge that they've come up to you and tried to interact with you, but clearly put your foot down and establish that, okay, that's it. I'm still the social worker. I'm living my life, and let's just part ways here. But the way we conduct ourselves in public, we always need to think about how that is reflecting on those that we might interact with in the community, who still see us, even though we're in our personal lives, they see us as our professional role. And so social workers must uphold professionalism both online and offline. Social workers should use social media mindfully, considering how their actions online may reflect on their professional identity. So at one point, I had a supervisor who, they were very professional, very appropriate during the workday, and even during their own lives, but on their Facebook, like every single post they put was like they were at a bar or at a club and like drinking and like, just having a good time, living their life. We all have the right to do that. But, if a client, or even myself, I was kind of shocked when I saw my supervisor's Facebook page and all this stuff was going on. They have all the right to live their life, but how is that reflecting on, like, me as their person they supervise? Like, I definitely kind of saw them in a different light after that. And I would imagine a client or someone that we're working with, if they were to see, if they're been referred to this service for issues they might have with substances or alcohol, and then they're looking at this person who's supposed to be managing their work, their case, and they're out there, living it up. It blurs those lines. It makes it confusing. It makes it challenging for those that we're working with. And so that's an additional layer that we want to try to avoid, an additional confusion that we'd like to avoid when working with people. So again, a lot of this stuff is about the balance that we need to find, the balance between what's right for you. You need to live your life. You need to let off some steam. You need to, interact with people in social media maybe sometimes, but how can you find a balance where you're able to do that, but still kind of maintain a professional demeanor, a projection on the community, because you never know who's seeing that, even potential employers or current employers. Like, there's just a lot of different layers of what the impact of your social media participation could be when someone's looking at your professionalism or your conduct through those posts. So, should social media interactions made by social workers in a personal capacity be fair game for professional scrutiny? So that's kind of what we've been talking about. That um, I would love to, I want to be able to live my life and be true to myself. I like hanging out with my friends, you know, once in a while I enjoy a beverage or two, but do I really need to post that? Maybe I feel the urge to, but you know, what's the balance? How much of my life can I share with my friends and family on these platforms versus what are the implications if my boss sees it, if my client sees it, if my coworker sees it? It's a balance that we have to establish, um, because there are personal and professional implications on us when somebody sees or interprets a post in a certain way. I saw someone, um, who said rural living can be challenging. So I have over the course of my life lived in some smaller communities, and it's true. Like you see, you know, everybody there. You see someone at the gas station, the grocery store, wherever you go, it's hard to avoid the people that you may be working with. And so a rural setting is definitely a place where you might want to be careful about what you're posting, how you're posting, the projection of you that you're putting out there to the world, um, because you're going to see those people in the real world, and you want to have those boundaries when you see them. Again, you don't want to see someone, especially if they come up to you and just like, you know, not acknowledge them or not say anything to them. If they've approached you, it's appropriate to say, hello, how you doing? Hope you're having a good day. I'll see you next week or whatever, something like that. But, you know, it's a balance that you need to find that's appropriate for you, for your role, for your agency, that keeps those boundaries and guide those boundaries clear. Let's see. I'm always very mindful of what I post on social media that can come back and reflect badly on me in my professional capacity as a social worker or the professional organization I sit on the board of. That's very true also. Like many of us in social work, we don't, our participation in society isn't only limited to, or not even social workers, like just people. You have your job and you have a role that you play there, but you might be on the PTA, and you might be on the neighborhood watch, and you might be in a fantasy football league, like all these different pieces of our lives that we're involved in. The PTA president could have a very different interpretation of your, you know, wine tasting trip as your fantasy football league or whatever. Like those interpretations could be very different, even though you're just out with your friends enjoying some wine. Um, but you know, you need to be conscious about who's in your life, who's in your world, and how might your what you're projecting on social media, what might that say to those people? Let's see. Getting close to the end here. Dual relationships and role confusion. And we've kind of already talked a little about this one. Engaging with clients on social media may lead to dual relationships where a social worker's professional and personal roles overlap, potentially affecting the power dynamic or changing the nature of their professional relationship. So, like I said, for us, we've been trained and educated about hopefully how to maybe compartmentalize the work that we do, our personal lives, how to establish boundaries, how to maintain these separations. For us, we may think that it's very clear, our social media interactions and posts, it's very clear that we're maintaining this delineation. We may think that, but to a youth or someone on our caseload, they don't have that same social work background or training or education to know how to differentiate. They just see you, whether you're in the office or at the club or at the grocery store, you're just, you know, Jennifer, my caseworker or whatever. And so that kind of understanding from them can very easily confuse them. Like when you're in session with them, let's say, they might be thinking of, oh, this is the lady that I saw at the grocery store. So I could, you know, we're just basically friends at this point. For you, it's clear you're not, but for them, because they saw a post of you at a grocery store, or they saw you at the grocery store, their understanding of your relationship could be, yeah, she's my caseworker, but she's also my friend. I could tell her anything, or I could do anything. It's very blurred for them, and so you want to be very conscious of that, of the relationships you establish, so that there's, to the extent possible, as little confusion as to what that relationship entails as possible. Because, like I said, it may seem obvious to us, but it's not always obvious to those that we're working with. So, again, this theme of providing clear guidelines, being very communicative, overly communicative about what these guidelines are, what these boundaries are, is always the best to default to. It's better to kind of go overboard on establishing this stuff than leaving ambiguity, because everyone's going to interpret what they see, whether it's on social media or in real life. They're going to interpret that through their lens. And if you haven't framed that observation by them as, hey, you might see me at the store, we could say hi, but that's it. Or you might, if you see a post for me on social media with my kids, that's just me and my kids at the park, but that's nothing to do with our work together. However you want to have that conversation, it's important to communicate that, overly communicate it, so that it's very clear to them what those relationships are on social media or in real life. So, is it appropriate to congratulate a client on social media for graduating from their parenting class? Why or why not? So, you may think that, you have a client, you referred them to a parenting class, maybe they were struggling, but they actually finished the class and they graduated, and you're so proud of them, and you go on Facebook or wherever and you say, "Oh, I'm so proud of, my the person I'm working with who you're not going to say their name, but I'm so proud of my client who graduated. Congratulations for finishing your parenting class." Now, that may seem like you're being nice and you're trying to give them some acknowledgement for their hard work, but maybe they didn't want anybody to know they were in a parenting class, and you didn't say their name. But back to the other point we made, people can still connect the dots sometimes and figure out who you're talking about. And maybe that, you're putting them in a situation now where they were trying to keep their situation secret, but in your effort to put a post to congratulate them and acknowledge them, you've now put them in a situation where they're uncomfortable, or they didn't want someone to know what's going on, and you've unintentionally done that. So you need to really be careful about, you know, even when you have good intentions, what you're posting and what you're putting out there on social media. So let me see if there's any large institutional employers routinely track employees online to assess risk association. Yeah, definitely. I don't even think it's large at this point. I think for sure large institutional employers check online presence, but also even some smaller organizations do that now too. It's very easy to do it, and so people definitely do that. So there's impacts on you personally and professionally based on what you're putting out there in social media. Um, let's see. Okay, let me go back to this, because I think we are almost done here. We just have a few more minutes. Digital literacy and accessibility. Let's see. Social workers must be aware of digital disparities among their clients. To address these gaps, they might help clients access digital resources or provide education. So unethical, and I'm just speeding through this because we're getting to the end. So, given what we know at this point about social media and its potential impacts, particularly on youth and particularly on female youth, girls, is it ethical to introduce it to clients who are not current users? So, let's say, um, for whatever reason, there's a resource. Let's say there's a Facebook page or something like that that you want to refer your client to, that you think could be beneficial to them, like um, you know housing resources in my local area or something like that. There's a Facebook group, and so you want to give that resource to your client, but they're not on social media, they're not on Facebook. Is it ethical to bring them into the world of social media if they've avoided it to this point? And, we know now that maybe social media is not the best for everybody. Are there any ethical considerations around that? Maybe, maybe not, but it's this level of consideration that we need to consider as professionals, um, when we're thinking about the ethical use of social media, because it seems very all of these tools seem very clear and very obvious sometimes to many of us, but it's not always the case. There are, as we keep saying, there are instances when it's not clear to the other end user, or there are gray lines that aren't always super clear. And so, on the one hand, you're wanting to provide a resource to someone, but on the other hand, do you want to bring them into this world? Maybe is it appropriate for their current psychological state, or whatever they're going through? Do you really want to bring them into this world? So it's maybe a one in a million kind of scenario, but things like that can happen where you have to really think through how you use social media in your work with clients. So this is a little quote that's similar to, I think Megan said something in the beginning of the session that I think this aligns with that. In this new area, or this new era of social work, those who can responsibly and ethically utilize new technologies will be at a distinct advantage over those who cannot. So if you, just by virtue of your interest in or your participation in this training, you're kind of distinguishing yourself as someone who is at least open to these technologies that are coming up all the time. And just that openness, that frame of mind where you're willing to learn, you're willing to consider and see how this may benefit you or your clients, that mindset is going to put you ahead of people who are just hoping the technology goes away, or staunchly against them. That's fine. That's perfectly okay. We all have the right to our opinions and positions on any of these technologies, but if you're open to them, if you learn about them, if you know about them, you do put yourself at an advantage over those who don't. And professionally, you may down the line be looking at a particular type of role or position that wants someone who's familiar with, someone that knows about AI, or familiar with telehealth, or is a responsible social media user. You're going to be that candidate versus someone who was just closing the door on any of these technologies. So that's kind of the last quote. I don't Let's see if we have questions in a few minutes, because I think we're almost out of time. But as an appreciation for participating in this session, and the time that you've dedicated here, and your participation in the chat and everything else, there's the 6 pillars of practical and responsible AI use for social workers. I have it also as it's like a 30-page little kind of ebook, easy to read. But if you want access to that, you can go to socialworkmagic.com/6pillars free. It's the address that you see up on the screen. And um, I think I don't know if I'll be able to give you this. I'll give Megan the presentation afterwards, because I think I forgot to include it in our materials. And then you should be able to have this whole presentation and these addresses, but you can get that guide there. And also, as appreciation, so the Social Work Magic AI tool that I talked about, um, there's different subscription levels that you can have. The highest subscription level is the whole enchilada, it's called. So with any subscription that you get on that tool, there's a 7-day free trial on any of them. But if you if you go to socialworkmagic.com, and at the checkout, if you put code change24, if you put that as your code, then you get 30 days free use. So 30 days of the highest level of the subscription on the Social Work Magic tool to just play with it, familiarize yourself. There's no commitment. You can cancel it when you're done, and that's it. But I just wanted to offer an extended free trial with that code if you're interested in Social Work Magic. And if you know how to take a picture of the screen, you can take a picture of that little barcode thing and get access to all the links to my social media or contact information or the AI tool, the 30-page guide, all that stuff. Or you could go to that address that you see there as well. And that is it. So I don't think we have time for questions, unfortunately. But I don't know. How do you want to finish up, Megan?
Yes, thank you, Ernesto. This was great. I'm going to hold on, I'm getting some feedback. Okay. I am going to ask that in the chat, people give one, we did this yesterday. What is one takeaway that you're taking from today? And we started 1 to 3 pulse check. Where are we now? Hopefully we maybe moved the needle a little bit and maybe you were like, I have no idea what AI is. But what is your takeaway from today or something to consider? Maybe you're like, I'm just going to play around with Chat GPT, or maybe I'm going to ask my agency if we have a policy around this. But where are we at 1 to 3 now, and what's your takeaway? AI is here to stay. That is for certain. I will tell you that. People are, look at this, Ernesto. We moved the needle.
That's exciting. It's encouraging for sure. Let's see.
And the ethics, which is Ernesto and I started talking about this topic probably what, Ernesto, over a year ago. And we said we need to, social workers, mental health professionals need to be having a seat at the table because engineers don't have a code of ethics. Computer software designers don't have a code of ethics. So you might see jobs popping up. I've seen Facebook hiring social workers. I've seen like more tech front facing startups hiring social workers, probably more in the macro space, but to do this work. So I'm like really encouraged for where it's heading.
That's awesome. Yeah, some people were asking for the QR code there. But yeah, also like on some of these new apps and AI technologies, if you go to a website and you see an application, you can click on a lot of them. They'll have like a board of directors, and you can, that might be an opportunity where you don't necessarily need to be like an employee of an organization or leave your job, but you can have an impact or influence over the design and the implementation of those tools on maybe something like a board of directors for these kinds of tools. And you'll see it like usually in the about section of a website. They'll show their board of directors, and could be an opportunity to infuse our perspective into those tools.
And maybe you're not going to use it professionally, but like Ernesto said, maybe you're going to use it to cook dinner tonight, or I've actually like had medical questions as I'm like, what for myself, like, obviously it is not a doctor, but just, hey, what are the side effects of this medication? That type of stuff. Just to get myself more familiar with using it as a tool. And I have used it for recipes and whatnot. And my mom went to Europe. My mom is in her late 60s now, and I told her about ChatGPT, and it built a Europe itinerary for her. So she used it to navigate around the different cities in Europe, and she was like, this is amazing. Oh my God, I can't believe I can use this for these things. So it's pretty cool.
And I love this comment by Annette, who said we can engage as co-creators with AI or be at the mercy of AI. We can be a creator or a victim about AI mindset. We can be leaders in AI as a way to empower clients and live out our calling / values as social workers. So yeah, I think, first of all, I don't have anything against, or I don't disparage anyone who's just rigidly and staunchly against it. I get it. I think it's healthy that we have that segment of our population and we're not all just jumping in, head first into this thing. So I totally respect those perspectives. But we basically, at this point, someone said it, it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. The billions and billions and billions of dollars being poured into this, like, we're not going back from that at this point. It's here. And so we have two options. Basically, we can stick our head in the sand metaphorically and just hope and wish that it goes away, or we go away before whatever, or we can get on board and figure out what works for us, how we can have an impact and leverage the technology to serve the people that we work with. At the end of the day, that's why we're all here, to serve our clients, our families and individuals that we work with. And if we, whether it's Microsoft Word or email or AI or whatever the tool, telehealth, whatever the tool is, if it can help us better serve our clients, then we should at least be open to that possibility. That's my opinion. And I appreciate that comment, Annette. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ernesto. And thank you everyone for being open-minded, right? You might have come in here thinking this is ridiculous. I'm not going to do anything with AI. I'm totally against it. But hopefully now you've had some different viewpoints and opinions. And I do also encourage you to stay curious, and you don't want to just accept everything at face value. If that's why we are important in this space. Like, do not do a copy and paste job from ChatGPT and use that as a shortcut. It's a tool, so learn to use the tool well. And I think that this can be really, really life-changing for social workers, for the field, and we should lean into it in ways that work best for us. So
exactly.
Yes, Ernesto really is the expert here. So I'm so thankful that he shared his expertise with us today. And so if you follow up steps from this, you will receive an email in the next 24 hours with a link to do your evaluation. You'll complete that. You should get your certificate. I know many of you already got your certificate for yesterday, so the turnaround time is very quick. We will also send out all the resources that Ernesto shared, so don't worry, those will make it to you after this. And I just want to thank Ernesto for his time and his expertise. And remember, these are ethics credits, which can be hard to come by, and you need them. So hopefully we brought you over the last 2 days some really interesting topics. We will continue to do once a year ethics training live, because I think that ethics can be very dry and boring, but we try to bring it to you in a way that's accessible and more interactive. So yes, so thank you everyone, and we thank you for spending your Saturday with us. We thank Ernesto for waking up and very, very early, and those West Coasters for joining us. And if you have any questions, please reach out. I hope you enjoyed this continuing education course from Agents of Change. Want to earn your CE credits for this course? Visit agentsofchangetraining.com or the link in the description to purchase the course and take the post-test. If you're looking for more CEs, check out our unlimited plan. You will get unlimited access to 150 plus ASWB and NBCC approved continuing education courses for one low annual fee. We're always adding new courses. Did I mention we also have 5 free CE credits available too? Check it out at agentsofchangetraining.com.